We've got two equations here. We've got x squared plus x minus 12 is greater than 0. And then we've got the exact same equation, except this time it's less than 0. So we already know how to solve inequalities. We know that y, we're looking for where y is greater than 0. And our x, we know that if we factorize the equation we have, it would be x plus 4, x minus 3. So because of this, we know our x-intercept are neg 4, 0, and 3, 0. Now we draw up our graph as we always do with inequalities. We plot our x-intercepts. Now we just label them. That's negative 4, 3. So we can immediately see when we look at the graph that when x is greater than 3, y is greater than 0. So we know that x is greater than 3. Or when x is less than negative 4, we also see that y is greater than 0. Therefore, x is greater than 3 or x is less than negative 4. Now the question is, why do we get this or sign here? Why don't we get x is greater than 3 and less than negative 4? The reason has to do with these two lines here. Notice how they're not joined. So if we take a value for x such as 2 and we sub it into our equation, 2 plus 4 is 6, 2 minus 3 is negative 1, 6 times negative 1 is negative 6, and y is not greater than 0. So this equation here would be saying that if x was to equal 2, y would be greater than 0, but we know that's not true because x can't equal 2, which this equation says it can. However, with the top equation, when x is greater than 3, yes, y is greater than 0. Or when x is less than negative 4, y is also greater than 0. So we know that that is our correct equation. And so now we'll solve the equation on the right. We know we're looking for when y is less than 0, and we get the same x-intercept as last time, negative 4, 0, 3, 0, and we'll get the same graph, but we'll draw it again. There is a key difference between these two, and that difference is the value of y that we're looking for. So we've got our negative 4 here and our 3 here. And so we know when we're looking for when y is less than 0, so we're looking at this bottom half here. When x is less than 3, we know that y is less than 0. We know that when x is greater than negative 4, y is greater than 0. So why is this written like this? Well, because we have this line that goes straight from here to here. And this one line represents all of our x values, where x is less than 3 and x is greater than negative 4. However, if we go back, we have these two lines. They are not joined together. So we have one value for x, then we have values that x cannot be, and then we have our values for x again. So it can't be from anywhere from here to here. It's just these two lines. And so that's where x would be two separate values. However, in this one, where the line is completely joined, we get all of our x values. And so we know that x would be less than 3 or greater than negative 4. Okay, so for solving inequality, first thing we want to do is we're going to write our equation out fully. So we know x plus 4 and x plus 3 multiplied by each other is less than 0. But we don't know what x plus 4 and x plus 3 is equal to, and that's equal to y. So y is equal to x plus 4 and x plus 3 multiplied by each other, and they together are less than 0. And because y is equal to x plus 4 and x plus 3, we know x plus 4 and x plus 3 is less than 0. So we can also write that y is less than 0. Okay, and we'll use that information later. Right now, the next step is to find the x-intercept. So with the form it's given us, it's pretty simple. We know our two x-intercepts are negative 4, 0 and negative 3, 0. And so now we're going to use our x-intercept to draw a graph and to graph a parabola on it. And so you don't need to find the turning point for this. You just need your two x-intercepts, which we have negative 4 and we have negative 3. So we're now going to graph this. Okay, now we're going to come back to y is less than 0. So we're looking for all the values of y where it's less than 0 and what x is equal to. We know that where y is less than 0 is this half of the graph. So this is the half we want to look. Now we're going to look at the x value. So what we want to look at now is where our graph is. All of the values where y is greater than 0 and we have an x value is this over here, the bottom part of our parabola. So the thing we can notice from this to get our inequality answer is that when the number negative 4 gets larger, it goes downwards this way, which means y is less than 0. So we know that x can be greater than negative 4 because when it is greater than negative 4, it will go down here and it will be greater than 0. And so now we look at our negative 3 point. When the number negative 3 gets smaller, it becomes greater than 0. If the number negative 3 were to get larger, and let's say we'll look at negative 2 for example, the value of negative 2 is over here on the graph and y is greater than 0 there. So that doesn't work. So x has to be less than negative 3 because for y to be less than 0. But it has to be greater than -4 for y to still be greater than 0, and that would be our inequality. Okay, so this is our next equation, and we're basically just going to take what we learned in the first slide and apply it to this slide. This slide's slightly more complicated, but just to find the x-intercepts, but it's still pretty simple. So we'll do the first step and write out our equation, which is y is equal to 2x minus x bracket 2x minus 4, which is less than 0. We know that y is less than 0. And so now we'll look for our x-intercepts. So 2x is equal to 6, and so we know x is then 3 because we divide both sides by 2. So x is equal to 3, and for the other equation, 2x is equal to 4, and we divide that by 2, so we know x equals 2. So now we can write out our x-intercept, which are 3, 0, and 2, 0, and those are our x-intercepts. And so now we'll graph this. We'll draw our graph, and we'll create the parabola, and we'll put out our x-intercept, x equals 2, x equals 3, and we'll draw our graph. So we're looking for where y is less than 0, so we know we're looking for this line of our parabola. So we're going to write down our x for our equation, and we'll start off with the number 3. When the number 3 gets smaller, we find y is less than 0, and that means x cannot be greater than 3, so x must be less than 3, so we write x is less than 3. Now we look at the number 2, and when the number 2 gets larger, we find y is greater than 0, up until 3, of course. So if the number 2 was to get smaller, we would find that y is not equal to 0. Therefore, x has to be greater than 2, because if x was smaller than 2, then y wouldn't equal 0, and that's our inequality.